the little cards chanting. An unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Well, good morning to everyone in the Zendo. And good morning and good afternoon to people online. Good to see you all. Generally speaking, most of us, I think, consider that we are self-powered, that we are making independent choices, that we are driving ourselves, we're powering ourselves. What am I going to have for breakfast today? Will I visit a friend or stay home? Will I slow down for this orange light or speed up and go through? We're making hundreds and hundreds of choices every single day, and there's a general feeling that we're making them. I think that's pretty normal. We have this general sense that we're making them. And I think we also have a general sense that our abilities and our qualities are more or less cultivated ourselves, whether we're being disciplined or whether we're not, whether we're cheerful, whether we're melancholy. And we often attribute our shortcomings more or less to ourselves as well. I'm not very smart, or I've got a poor sense of direction, or I'm so anxious, I've got anger issues. We generally tend to attribute them to ourselves. And in a similar way, we often habitually attribute other people's qualities to them. They are like that because they choose to be that way. And within that, there is also a concession that we make that we are influenced by others. And some of how we are could be explained by our parents, events, things that happened to us, things we received, things we didn't receive. And we'll do that with other people as well. Hopefully we do it with some compassion. When somebody does something, we might say, well, it makes sense that they do that given what their father was like, or something like that. But the Buddha taught, and this is really described in quite a lot of detail in the Samdi Namochava Sutra, he taught that we are other-powered. He didn't teach that we are partially other-powered. He taught that we are other-powered, that we are the result. Result sounds a little bit like an endpoint. We are in a continual flow of influence from others. And this can sound a little confusing because the Buddha, of course, also taught that there is no self and there is no other. And we've spoken about this here a number of times, particularly in the talk some months ago on the four propositions. Within the Buddhist teachings, there are many teachings that appear contradictory to each other. And rather than seeing them as contradictory, we can see them as complementary, because reality can't actually be described anyway. So all of the teachings are in a complementary way, giving us a sense of how to navigate reality in a way that leads to an equanimity and a kindness and a wisdom in us. So all of these teachings are a way to understand things. They're not how things are. So this teaching that we are other-powered is a way that results in greater equanimity and greater compassion, which really are the fruits of wisdom. So this is a way to hear it this way. And the skill for us as practitioners is to study all of these different teachings and to work out how to apply them in which situation. Just tipping a little way this way, tipping a little that way. After a while, not consciously at all, it just naturally flows. What's the most compassionate response in this moment? What's the most wise response in this moment? And a different teaching will inform us. So this teaching that we are other-powered, it isn't that we are 10% other-powered or 60% other-powered. It's that we're 100% other-powered. This is very difficult to really to imagine. It's hard to imagine that we're 100% other-powered. That everything that we are is completely 100% attributed to all that we have received, which the Buddha describes as gifts. They're described as gifts, even if they're not always pleasant. They're still described as gifts. They're things that we have received. We can think of it a little bit like that we are a stream of consciousness, like a river, and that we're made of all the water that flows in all the different ways in which the water flows in. The river isn't making itself, and the water isn't even making itself. It's just this continual flow that appears as a river, but it's all of the water, which maybe is a way we can think of as Buddha nature or just as energy. And not only does it apply to the river, but all the different ways water manifests itself as mist, as hail, as snow, as rain, as ocean, as lakes. None of them make themselves. All of them are the result of this movement. So I've heard this teaching many times over the years. And the more I hear it, And the more I can feel the truth of it in myself, there is more feelings of gratitude that arise, just very naturally, not in a big dramatic way. Just a sense of gratitude for any capacity that I have, anything that I'm receiving, a real sense of gratitude that this comes from others, doesn't come from me. Just a simple little example I think of is, I think I'm somewhat like my father and have become more like him over the years. In the morning when he would drive to school, first of all, he always had tea and toast for breakfast. And to this day, I still have tea and toast. And all those years I lived in America, I took jars of Promite with me. I had Promite on toast every single morning for 20 years in America. Maybe a few mornings I didn't. But that came from, that's what my father did. And toast and tea in the morning. He was always heading off in a hurry. We'd get in the car to go to school, and about 2 streets down after driving, he'd click on his seatbelt. And then I think, oh yeah, seatbelt. I'd click on my seatbelt. And that's how I put my seatbelt on. I get in my car, I start driving, a couple of blocks down, I put on my seatbelt. And I never noticed that I did that particularly until I spent time with someone who got in the car, put on the seatbelt, and then turned the engine on. And we'd get in the car and they'd sit there for a moment, and I'd be sitting there, and then they'd say, can you put your seatbelt on? I'd go, oh, I'll put my seatbelt on. And then they'd turn on the car. And it led me to think about my habit of how I did that. And realizing, that's what my father did. I remember it now. We'd be going up this street, it's called Carter Street, and I'd hear that click, and then I'd put on my seatbelt. And the person I was with probably had parents that put their seatbelt on before they turned the key in the ignition. It's just a teeny little example. And that one is a more kind of linear example. But if we can contemplate, really consider that everything that we are doing is the result of things like that, is the result of people and events that we remember and don't remember. Not only does it generate feelings of gratitude for all that's good, but it also generates feelings of acceptance and compassion towards ourselves for the aspects of ourselves that we don't feel so great about. Instead of getting caught in a kind of self-pity or self-doubt, self-criticism, we can have a much more gentle attitude, like, well, it's kind of inevitable, given the things that have happened to me. So an indication that we're understanding the teachings and they're sinking into us is that we feel these emotions arising naturally. I don't know if emotions is quite the right word, but we feel compassion, we feel gratitude, and we have an acceptance which is leads to feelings of equanimity. And we feel that feeling towards others as well. We're less judgmental about other people's behavior and speech. We're more understanding that they're other-powered. And the deeper and deeper this teaching is understood in us, that the idea of having malice towards anyone just becomes kind of almost sort of a tragically comedic, because from this perspective, they don't exist as an independent entity at all. They are 100% other-powered. They are 100% the result of everything around them, not 60%, not 80%. Takes a really long time, I think, for many of us to understand the depth of this teaching and the implications of this teaching. Because then when we take the next step out, that I am 100% other powered, the other that is powering me is also 100% other powered. Their actions that influenced me were caused by an unknowable constellation of others, and they also were 100% other powered. So it has no end. There's just no end. There's no one to blame. This is another way of contemplating no self, is to contemplate that we are other powered. So it does really create a sense of equanimity and acceptance that everything is the way it is inevitably because of all the conditions. We can relax a little bit more. The other, side of this teaching is not only are we other powered, but we are powering others. And this is where there is, if it would be possible to misconstrue that we are other powered as meaning, well, there's just no point in doing anything, I'm just other powered, which would be a misunderstanding of the teaching, because moment by moment we're still being influenced, and we are influencing, which is the most important thing for us as practitioners, that we are powering others. Every part of the day we are subtly powering others. Just the fact that we're here together, all of us here in the room and online, we've made this choice to be here together. We're influencing each other, we're creating each other. And the more that we contemplate this, the more we wish to be of benefit, the more we wish to power others in a way that will be beneficial to them. And the more we wish for others to power us in a way that will be beneficial for us. And this sort of cycle happens, which is why people, become part of a Sangha and keep turning up and keep turning up. They feel the effects of being other powered. And they want to continue to be other powered in wholesome ways, and they want to continue to power others in wholesome ways. And we feel the positive effects of this sort of calm within ourselves, and a positive sense of self-love, self-acceptance. And that's motivating. So the teachings are powering us, and those teachings come from all of the people over the last, let's just say, 2,500 years. But of course it goes back endlessly. There's no beginning. You might find that sometimes when you hear a teaching like this, that we're 100% other powered, that there might be some resistance or some examples that don't seem to fit, and that's okay. But I would encourage you to just stay with the not knowing, stay with the confusion a little bit. Just hang out there with it rather than trying to say, it doesn't make sense in relation to this. Just try and, I would encourage you to just trust. Maybe there's something really true about this teaching, and hang out with it for a while. See if you can find a way for it to make sense that I'm 100% other powered. One of the big effects that this has had, I've noticed in myself and I notice in others, is there's just no blaming. You don't need to blame anyone for anything. And it's It's a great liberation to not need to blame anyone for anything. And it's not that we don't hold people accountable on a practical level. I think a nice example is the way in some Scandinavian countries, the way that they deal with crime is really very enlightened. People who commit a crime and that they are a danger to society do need to be separated from society for safety reasons. But it's often viewed in a couple of the systems that they have there that this is a product of all the things that have happened to this person. And they're rehabilitated, they're educated, they're taught basic life skills like how to cook and how to clean, if that's necessary. They're given psychological care because most people have trauma. Most crime, you could say, has its origins in trauma or neglect. They're trained. And then basically when they're no longer a danger to society, then they're let out and off they go. They're not punished. They're not punished at all. And we can cultivate that attitude to everybody. It doesn't mean that we may not need to say, I think it's not good for me to spend time with this person, but we don't need to have even blame toward them, let alone judging them as bad and morally bad in some way. We can really consider they are 100% other-powered. They are a result of all the things that have happened to them. And in this moment, even if we have no direct contact, in our minds, in this moment, we can see if we can think something wholesome about that person, just to cultivate in ourselves. And when we do that, when we hear a teaching and then remember it, that's kind of being other-powered, because we heard the teaching. Oh yeah, there's that thing about being 100% other-powered. We remember it. So that action of remembering is an other-powered action. It came from having heard the teaching. Sometimes people might think, well, if we think this way, well, then we can't really sort of celebrate our successes or praise someone for their talents. But it doesn't stop us doing that. I can still feel like, for example, towards my teachers, even though I can say they are 100% other-powered, that the fact that they are wonderful teachers is because of all of the things that have happened to them and all of the gifts that they have received. Still, in that particular stream of consciousness, that particular body, they are the one that gets up at 4:30 in the morning and goes into the Zendo. They are the one that gives the Dharma talk and maybe is very tired but keeps on going. They are the one that has that, that is inside the discipline, that experiences the discipline. So I can still feel kind of gratitude and praise towards them. They're the ones experiencing it in their body, even though they're 100% other-powered. Like in the same way we can do with athletes, we can just think, my gosh, for that person to be such a great athlete, they've got to be disciplined every day. They have to be training every day. They hardly ever get to take days off. They're always having to think about their diet. They're always having to think about training. They don't get to just do holidays somewhere. And even though we can say they are like that because of all the conditions that made it possible for them to be like that, we can still think it's amazing. We can still be happy for them and grateful to them and aware that they are experiencing this 100% other-poweredness. They are experiencing it in their body. And they are having that, they're that particular stream, a particular little rivulet of water. They're experiencing it. So we can have a lot of respect for them. And for people who are very different to that, who are going around having a chaotic life, creating harm, we can have a lot of compassion for them because they're in that body that is suffering. They're in that body that is full of anger or full of greed. whatever they are experiencing. They're in that body experiencing it. So we can have a lot of compassion for them. This is case 6 from The Gateless Barrier. The world-honoured one twirls a flower. Once, in ancient times, when the world-honoured one was at Vulture Peak, he twirled a flower before his assembled disciples. All were silent. Only Mahas Kasyapa broke into a smile. The world-honoured one said, I have the eye treasury of right Dharma, the subtle mind of Nirvana, the true form of no form, and the flawless gate of the teaching. It is not established upon words and phrases. It is a special transmission outside tradition. I now entrust this to Maha Kasyapa. This is a very well-known koan and a very well-known story of the Buddha twirling a flower and Maha Kasyapa smiling, and the world-honoured one recognizing his awakening in that. There's a comment here about this case. The story reflects the South Asian culture of bringing flowers to temple images and to monks and nuns. Someone had presented a single flower to the Buddha before he spoke. He held it up and looked around, twirling it gently, waiting for a response. Many of Buddha's successors have made similar simple presentations. Zhao Zhou said, "Mu." Chu Chi held up one finger. Nan Chuan presented a sickle. Once, when Nan Chuan was working in the garden, a monk asked him, "What is the way to Nan Chuan?" Nan Chuan held up a sickle and said, "This sickle costs 30 cents. The monk said, "I didn't ask about the sickle. I asked about the way to Nan Chuan." Nan Chuan said, "I can use it with pleasure." I picked these two koans just as a sort of a simple example of, in the first one, somebody gave a flower to the Buddha. We don't know about that somebody because people were always giving flowers as offerings in India and still do. But that person gave a flower to the Buddha. And then this event occurred where he twirled the flower and Maha Kasyapa smiled, and then he became the Dharma successor. And that story got written down. Well, it would have been spoken and talked about amongst the monks and nuns. It eventually got written down. It got put into collections of printed books in the early days. And then people read those books and read that story. And people went decades, centuries later, people were sitting in zendos, heard that story, bought that book. And here we are, the book is now here in the 21st century, and we're reading it here in Australia about the Buddha twirling of flowers. It's just a very simple example of all of this is other powered. And it's an infinite number of things that cause us to hear that story right now. And it's now an image in our minds in this moment, this image of Buddha twirling the flower. And I like the story of the sickle just because I think it's so nice that he says, "This sickle cost 30 cents. And the monk's just like, "I didn't ask about that." And the reason the monk didn't ask about that is because all of the conditions in his life at that moment made it not possible for him to understand what Nan Chuan was saying in that moment. Not because he was just an idiot or something like that, but because all of the conditions of his life in that moment resulted in him just looking confused at Nan Chuan. But when Nanchuan said, this sick will cost 30 cents, that was an other powering moment, and we don't know what that monk did. In many of these stories, what happens in these exchanges is the monk or the nun goes off and then just is totally confused and chews over that and chews over it. And if the conditions are ripe, because of all of the other powered events, they will keep chewing over it and will keep chewing over it. And either go back to the teacher and say, why did you say the sickle cost 30 cents? Why did you say that to me when I was asking how to get to this mountain or this temple? Or they'll just grapple with it until suddenly they think, oh my God, I feel like such a fool. He was teaching me and I didn't see it. So however a person responds to any situation, it's 100% other powered. And we are powering others. We are powering others. I think I'll stop there and see if anybody would like to ask a question or make a comment, give an